But yeah, so the Minnesota Wild team, I think overall, I think the younger players and some of the guys they have overseas, long term, I'm still really excited for the Minnesota Wild. I think obviously these Parise and Suter contracts, like the buyouts, those cap hits are brutal against their salary cap. But in 2-3 years when the cap goes up, and then you talk about the Wild having some of these younger pieces on top of the core they already have, built off of Kaprizov, Zuccarello is obviously getting older, but I even think Rossi coming into the fold, Boldy and what he's shown so far. I think Wallstead as the future in net is going to come in perfect timing after Marc-Andre Fleury's contract's over. I was talking about that the other day, and I think Philip Gustafson still has a lot of untapped potential. I think Lambos in there, as you said, a couple prospect overseas. The Wild, I think their timeline is perfect in terms of Fleury, a couple years, and then Wallstead will be in there. I like the potential of the suggestion of the Wild targeting a middle six guy, because I wonder, it's like Freddie Gaudreau has a year left on his contract. So will they be moving on from Freddie Gaudreau? I think it all depends on like where the Wild are at in the season. Like if they're a contender, because I think the kind of that frame, kind of that mindset for the Wild is like they could go as high as like second in the division all the way to like fourth or fifth potentially. So they could be a division spot team, wildcard team, or I could even see them missing the playoffs. The Wild are tough. I think it all depends on Fleury's health and what Fleury does, or Philip Gustafson. Will they trade Matt Dumba? I could see them also trading like a Kulikov. But the Dumba one is like, I think fans, as I said, like I think Wild fans want to see Dumba moved on. That $6 million cap, and he's got a year left. All depends on how the Wild are, as I said, in the season and what their mindset is going into the trade deadline. Because at the end of the day, if they're selling at the deadline, then the Wild fully could they could just retain 50% on Dumba and maybe get like a second round pick or something. I really like Calen Addison, as I said. I think Addison, Lambos coming in. I think the conversation is like, who do you move? So if it's Kulikov and Dumba, then obviously you still have the core of like Brodin, Spurgeon, and then you brought Middleton in. You even kept Merrill in there. So we'll see. When you look at the Wild cap friendly, a lot of their defense right now, like their current defense, is short-term guys. Like 4 of these guys you're probably not going to see long-term on the Wild. The only guy I can maybe see stick around for a bit just because of his age is Middleton, because they signed him to a 3-year deal. I could see Middleton stick around for a while. But Kulikov, Goligoski, Dumba, Merrill, I would say in 2-3 years, all these guys are gone. Spurgeon stays long-term. Brodin stays probably long-term. And Middleton maybe long-term. So after that, the spots get filled up by a Lambos, by an Addison. And then past that, probably just maybe an addition through free agency, trade, or, and I didn't even mention this guy yet, Ryan O'Rourke. I'm really high on Ryan O'Rourke. I think between Lambos, O'Rourke, and Addison, the Wild have, I would say, a decent amount to be excited about for their overall defense core in like 3-4 years. And then once those Suter Parise contracts, once you get to, like, what is it, year, I think, 2025, I think. It's in around, 2025, 2026. Those cap hits only go down to $833K. It sucks. It honestly sucks that they have to wait 3 years for those cap hits that are affecting them $6 and $7 million against the cap each. Like, that's nuts. Like, over 14 mil against the cap for those guys. But by 2025, the cap will be up. 2025, 2026, you could lock in the Wild for being like a consistent playoff contender. And they may even be a contender every year up until that point if they use their cap space wisely. Because you do have Boldy right now on his ELC. You have, you have Boldy on his ELC right now. You have Rossi, I think, he's got a couple of years left on his ELC. Or does he have the full 3 years? I guess he does have the full 3 years because he hasn't played enough. So Rossi has the full 3 years on the ELC. Boldy has the 1 year left on his ELC. And then you just drafted a guy like Ogren. Like Liam Ogren, I'm really high on him as well for the Wild. So obviously that's a big-time addition from this 2022 draft. In terms of the Wild, like targeting guys, I've talked about it. Would a reunion like Charlie Coyle make some sense if the Bruins were taking back like a Dumba or another contract back the other way? I even made like a hot take and kind of a funny suggestion to say, like, if they made like a dump like that, like, and sent Dumba the other way and got an asset from the Bruins, maybe the Wild would consider reuniting or uniting the Foligno brothers together and having Nick and Marcus Foligno on the same team. I think that would be pretty funny, because then Nick Foligno, only 1 year left, then maybe he just signs a cheap deal with the Wild and retires with the Wild with his brother. I mean, I don't think the Wild would mind signing Nick Foligno to a minimum deal or under $1 million. Like, that would be pretty cheap for a couple of years. Christian Dvorak could be another target. If you're replacing a guy like Freddie Gaudreau, we'll see what his future is. Christian Dvorak could be a good guy to have for a lot of teams, and the Wild could be one of those teams to target. Still fairly young. I feel like the Habs are going to trade off a lot of guys. He'd be a good middle six guy to have, whether he's playing center on the second line, or he can play left wing as well. So the Wild are probably going to target some guys like that with term that are on good deals. They're not going to really target guys that are rentals, I don't think, at least, unless it's like a cheap rental if they're in a really good playoff spot. I just think with their cap situation, they want to find good value players on 3 or 4 year deals, or even like 3 year deals that can ride out through this kind of cap problem era until those buyout cap hits are down in 2025. So the Wild have a lot of question marks, but I think in terms of their prospect pool and in terms of their timeline, they're still going to be really good right now, but I think extremely good when if they can sign Kaprizov to an extension in 3 years, and in that 2025-2026 year, Kaprizov will still be under contract, and I think there's a big opportunity for the Wild to maybe even go on a cup run. So we're going to see a lot from the Wild and Bill Guerin and a lot of maneuvering, but I think they still have a really competitive team, and it could be a team, I would say, not to take lightly this year.